Check, check. Check, check.
I'm still trying to figure out when the interviews are going to happen. I would like to do them soon. But
Oh, random other technical side note.
Yeah.
Did you check out that MOU from TechBridge? I forwarded that to you, right? Lena sent it to me, and I sent it to you. Is there any follow-up I need to do with them just to get that off that list?
Hi, welcome everybody. We'll get started in just 1 minute. Or rather, let's give it 5 minutes for people to log in and then we'll get started. Thank you. All right, welcome. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Bonnie O'Keefe, and we're going to go ahead and get started. Please note just a couple housekeeping measures here. We are recording this session, so if you want to go back later and listen in, you may, and we're going to post it on OSSI's website, or if you want to share with others at your school. We may be joined by people later on. And for right now, to reduce background noise, I have muted everybody, but periodically we're going to take a quick break and take questions, and I'll unmute people, or you can always use the chat box feature if you have a question, if you can't hear me through the audio, or if you have anything else to add, please do use the chat box to communicate. And with that, we'll get started. Welcome to an introduction to PARCC, Partnership Assessment of Readiness for College and Career, DC's state assessment in ELA and math for new LEA staff. And what do I mean by that? It's an introduction for any LEA staff in DC who are new to PARCC, especially those from brand new LEAs, or if you are newly appointed to PARCC. But if you are here for a refresher course or just to get more familiar with PARCC, even if you're not the top LEA assessment coordinator, you're also very much welcome. So it's an across-the-board introduction for LEA staff. Our presenters today from the OSSI assessment team are going to be both myself, Bonnie O'Keefe. I'm the PARCC coordinator here at OSSI, and I'm also joined by Dr. Tanya Mead, our state test integrity coordinator, who's going to be giving part of the presentation focused on test security and test integrity. So those are our two presenters today. So here's our agenda today. We're going to start off with a brief overview of all our district-wide assessments, statewide assessments, you might call them, then go into some basics of PARCC, who the PARCC Consortium is, what the test is, when it's given in DC, where it's given, how it's given, and why DC has chosen to use these new tests. Then we're going to go into a brief overview of the year in PARCC. We're going to look at, typo there, PARCC in the 2015-16, not the 2015-26 school year, apologies for that, and what to expect starting from this fall and going to next summer of 16. So what you can expect from the LEA level throughout the year with PARCC. We're also, as I mentioned, going to dive into test integrity, which is very important and critical to know about. In DC, we have a test integrity law, and Tanya is going to get into the basics of that. Certainly not a comprehensive overview, but what you need to know as an LEA staff member about the importance of having a valid and reliable and secure test administration for PARCC and all our DC-wide assessments. And then briefly, we're going to look at some PARCC resources where you can continue to learn more and some opportunities to engage in the PARCC process and continue this conversation throughout the year. So moving on to all our DC-wide assessments. So as you probably know, the District of Columbia administers multiple assessments annually, and this is in accordance with DC and federal law. These DC-wide assessments are an important source of information on student progress and performance relative to DC's educational standards. So what we have here are the names of the assessment, the standards measured, and the students tested. So at the top of the list, you'll see PARCC in ELA and math, and PARCC is aligned to the Common Core state standards in ELA and math, which DC adopted several years ago as its state standards in those two subjects. The students tested in PARCC are all students in grades 3 through 8 and at least once in high school, and we'll go into the details of that a little later. Next in line, we have the National Center and State Collaborative, or NCSIC as we call it, test in ELA and math. This test measures alternate achievement standards for the same general grades of students, but only for those students who are eligible for alternate assessments, and those are students with significant cognitive disabilities. So usually that's fewer than 1% of our total student body is eligible to take those alternate tests. And if you think your LEA may have students who are eligible for that alternate test, you can follow up with us to get that process of determining eligibility. Next, we have our DC Science test, which is also a new test like PARCC. Unlike PARCC, it is specific to DC. And that test measures the Next Generation Science Standards, or NGSS. And those were also standards newly adopted, I believe in 2013-14. Those new standards came into place in DC. And that test is given in grades 5, 8, and to high school students taking biology. Similar to how NCSIC is the alternate assessment for reading and math, there's also an alternate assessment in science called the DC Science Alternate. Those measure alternate science standards, and the same grades are tested. We then have Access, which is our assessment for English language learners that measures English language proficiency, and that test is administered annually to all ELL students in grades K through 12. So that's how we track student progress in English proficiency at the statewide level, and that test is also used for other purposes, but we won't be going into detail on the Access today. And finally, though this isn't specific to DC, it's true of every state in the nation, but we also administer NAEP to our students, the National Assessment of Educational Progress. NAEP has its own standards. It's been given for many decades to sampled students in a variety of grade and subjects. So reading and math NAEP, of course, are the biggest tests, get the biggest attention, but NAEP is also administered to a smaller sample of students, including students in DC, in subjects like science and social studies, as well as other subjects. So this is an overview of all the assessments in DC that fall under the banner of DC-wide assessments, with NAEP and Access being a little bit of a special case. Now we're going to get into the meat of PARCC Basics: who, what, when, where, how, and why. Starting with who is the PARCC Consortium. So as I mentioned earlier, PARCC stands for Partnership for Assessment of Readiness for College and Careers. PARCC is a group of states that have worked together since 2010 to develop a set of assessments that are designed to measure student mastery of the Common Core state standards in ELA and math. Here at OSSE, the Office of the State Superintendent of Education, we're the state agency responsible for working with you all as LEAs and with schools to administer these DC-wide assessments, including PARCC. Pearson is our test vendor for PARCC, so they are the ones who you might interact with as an LEA test coordinator. For tech support, they're the ones who help us administer PARCC on the computer and on paper. In DC, as I mentioned briefly earlier, all students in grades 3 through 8 must take PARCC and in ELA and math, and students in high school must take PARCC Geometry or Integrated Math and ELA 10. So those are our high school course-based tests that are required. There are a very few exceptions to students who would not have to take the PARCC who are in those grades or courses. Those are students who get a approved medical exemption, so a form that has to be signed by a doctor affirming that the student is medically unable to complete the test. If the student is eligible for the NCSIC exam, meaning that they have a significant cognitive disability, or if the student is new to the country, is a first-year English language learner, they are then exempt from taking the ELA test only, but they do still have to take the math. And just as a reminder for people who came in a little late, if you have questions, if you have trouble hearing me, please do type it into the chat box and we will try to address your questions as we go along and take a quick break in between sections to hear if there are any questions. Now for what. So what is the park? How is it designed? Here we have sort of a before and after. Some of you may have been involved with the park in 14-15, and then you would be familiar with the terms EOY and PBA. So that stands for end of year and performance-based assessment. Those were the two parts of the assessment in this past year, the first year of administering PARCC. So the important thing to remember for everyone who's new is that that two-part exam has been changed. And going forward, as you'll see on the right side of the screen in 15-16, we have a combined PBA and EOY, one test that's given at approximately between 75 and 90% of the total school year as a summative assessment, meaning it's at the end of the year to measure what students have learned over the entire course of the year. You'll also see in blue on the right side of the screen a summary of some of the non-summative tools that are also going to be available this year on PARCC. So these are optional. They're going to be provided at no cost by OSSE, and they are brand new for PARCC, and there are a variety of instructional tools that could help your students and your teachers prepare for PARCC, but more importantly, think about how to instruct for the Common Core and benchmark for the Common Core. So we have diagnostic tools, which are available in grades 3 through 8. So those are little mini tests that you can give all at once or in pieces to sort of pinpoint student skill sets and areas for improvement in reading and math in different mini modules. K2 formative tests for our younger learners who do not yet have to take the PARCC, but these K2 formative tasks could be helpful instructional tools for teachers aligned to the Common Core. And finally, speaking and listening formative tools. So speaking and listening is a part of the Common Core state standards, but it's not one that can be easily tested in the format of a statewide test. So instead, PARCC is offering this as a tool for teachers to ensure that they are covering speaking and listening skills in the Common Core, but that will not be used except for, optionally by teachers if it's useful for them. I'm going to pause for a second here. If anyone has any questions about this diagram, about the non-summative tools, or the combination of PBA and EOY, please do type it into the chat box. All right, next we'll move on to when. So when is PARCC being given in DC? So for 15-16, there are several test date options for LEAs. LEAs have not had to formally choose yet, so there's still some time and flexibility if you're not sure what your LEA is going to choose. But generally, most schools will be giving it sometime in April, early May. The total dates will run from March 28th to May 20th, and there are several options for computer tests and one option for schools that are opting for paper tests. One thing to note, and this might be getting a little bit too in the weeds, but if you have students in your school who have to take paper tests for reasons of an accommodation, they can test on the normal computer schedule. So if you're a computer-based PARCC LEA, but you have some students taking paper for accommodations, they don't have to be on that paper schedule. That's an exception. And please do ask questions or shoot me an email after this. I'm happy to answer any questions about PARCC dates. These are also available on our website. So where was PARCC administered? As I mentioned, one of the unique things about PARCC in the sort of history of statewide assessments is that this year PARCC was given in several states. DC of course, but also Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Louisiana, Illinois, Mississippi, Arkansas, Colorado, New Mexico, and Ohio. So when scores come out this fall, our scores will be comparable with students from those states. And in DC, it's worth noting that more than 40,000 students at 50 LEAs and nearly 300 schools participated in the park. So we had a very broad swath of students taking it. The year prior, we also gave a park field test, which had 8,000 students and 18 LEAs participating. So we've had several years now of big park participation in DC, which has been very exciting. So how? Earlier I mentioned computer versus paper options, and this slide gets a little bit more into those details. In 2014-15, 93% of students took PARCC on computers, which was a first in DC to administer a statewide test on computers. LEAs could choose to use paper, but paper tests for most students are phasing out in a few years. So if your LEA is still using paper or planning to administer tests on paper, it's worth thinking about what your transition plan is. However, paper will always be available for students who need a paper test as an accommodation for students with disabilities. So why is PARCC administered on the computer? PARCC uses technology for many purposes, including increasing accessibility. You'll notice that there are a lot of accessibility features and accommodations that are built into the PARCC exam, which is new and unique in the scope of DC, and I think helps more students access the test and the test content successfully. Also uses technology to engage students in new ways by doing things such as having videos embedded, graphics embedded, different ways of answering questions. So moving away from the 4-question multiple choice into lots of different ways for students to show their knowledge. And finally, creating efficiencies in administration, scoring, and reporting. So those of you who helped administer the DC CAS several years ago, you might remember a lot of putting labels on tests, shipping, storing. It could be, a pretty burdensome and stressful process. And we heard this year from a lot of folks that a computer-based test was a lot easier in that regard, in that, once the test is done, there's nothing to send back. PARCC computer-based tests are administered using 2 primary web-based tools, which you'll hear a lot about in the coming year. So it's good to jot these names down right now. And those tools are Pearson Access Next, which is an administrative portal where you as an LEA person or your school person or the teacher administering PARCC in the classroom can all access sort of behind-the-scenes information. That's how you administer the test, get it started, and track it, and do a whole bunch of other things like registering students, resolving any problems, marking different things. So you'll get very familiar with Pearson Access Next. And the other big piece of software we use in PARCC is called TestNav. And so that is a secure testing platform that has all those embedded tools and features. So the test is PARCC. The tool we use to administer it on the computer is called TestNav. So that's just the program that we use to deliver the PARCC to everybody. So there's the distinction between the test content and the program we use to administer it securely. And the last part of our PARCC Basics is why. Why did we choose to join the PARCC? Why did we give this test? So as I mentioned, PARCC measures performance against the Common Core state standards, grade level expectations to determine whether students are on track for college and career readiness. So it's important to remember that compared to our old test, DC CAS, which was last given in the 13-14 school year, PARCC is unique in that it doesn't measure proficiency against our old standards. It measures college and career readiness. PARCC asks students to demonstrate critical thinking skills, to explain answers analytically, Sorry, folks, having a little bit of technical difficulties here. Okay, great. PARCC asks students to demonstrate critical thinking skills, to write and explain their answers analytically, and it really rises to the level of the Common Core state standards rigor. So that was a big part of the reason why DC chose to join this consortium. PARCC has a lot of writing, and we had formerly had our own composition test, which was only administered at 3 grades, and now with the PARCC, we are able to assess writing skills at all our tested grades. PARCC generates reliable and valid information to inform instruction in schools and LEAs and also inform accountability decisions at the state level. So that's another part of OSSE's responsibilities under No Child Left Behind are to organize, administer, design school and LEA level accountability, and our statewide tests are one part of that system. The scores are comparable across participating states and districts. Now, this might not be as important to you to compare to New Mexico, for instance, but because Maryland is also in PARCC, and we know we have a fair amount of students moving in between Maryland and DC schools, it's a real advantage for us to be able to compare scores and to look at students' performance if they were in Montgomery County schools or Prince George's schools and vice versa. So it's important to, that way we can know a student's PARCC performance and also compare across those lines, which can be kind of porous in the district, as I think we all know. As I mentioned, PARCC fulfills DC's requirements under federal law, but it is important to note that in DC, there are not graduation or grade promotion requirements for students tied to these tests. So unlike in some states where you would need to pass the state test in order to graduate or in order to move on to the next grade level, in DC, those decisions are left up to the LEA. So your LEA may choose to use these scores for other student level purposes, but at the state level, those requirements are not prescribed in DC. So PARCC in the 15-16 school year, what to expect. So I'll pause for a moment here if you want to enter something into the chat box to grab my attention using one of the tools here, please feel free to do so. So I'll stop for a moment if anyone has a question. All right, not seeing anything in the chat box, so we're going to move on. So here's a summary of what you can expect from PARCC in oh, sorry, just realized my screen sharing was paused for a moment. Here we go. So what to expect, 15-16, and what to expect for fall. So fall of this year, what you can expect is the release of last year's test results later this fall. You can expect those around October, November. At around the same time, you can also expect school year item release. So what that means is a set of real operational items that were actually on the test last year are going to be released in the fall along with the scores, and we hope that those will be used by schools as a valuable instructional tool to understand the test a little better, to understand, for instance, on some of the essays, what a 5-point essay looks like versus a 1-point essay. So there'll be data on how students performed on that set of released items, and there will be a lot of ancillary information to help schools and teachers use those items and use that information to help them interpret test results. So what you can expect there is we're going to be releasing approximately a full test worth of items in ELA and math at each grade level. So not every single item, of course, because once we release an item, it will no longer be used on the test, but it is good for understanding, especially in this first year of PARCC. I think there's a lot of learning and understanding that we're still going to do about the content of the test and what it really means to teach to these standards. We're also going to be releasing a lot of guidance documents for the upcoming test year in spring of 2016. Policy updates, we're going to be having reviews and releasing updated policies, which LEA folks will have an opportunity to review and weigh in on in many cases. Things like test manuals, test dates, which I showed you earlier, business rules for things like who has to take the high school exam. So those will be reviewed and released, and sometimes, just re-released, but sometimes changed. There will be trainings throughout the fall on test administration, test content, accommodations, score interpretation, standards, and instruction. So these won't be necessarily the required or the big trainings that will come later in the winter and spring, but there will be a lot of opportunities in the fall to get up to speed on PARCC and to be ready to administer in the spring, particularly around specialized areas where we felt from last year that we could have, improved our trainings or done a better job of supporting folks, or areas where we saw particular need. So that will be on the docket for the fall, and keep an eye out for a training calendar soon. Also, what you can expect is to be doing some planning at the LEA and the school level, especially around accommodations and accessibility. So we know that IEPs are reviewed year-round, but especially in the fall. We've heard that a lot of folks do IEP reviews at that time. And when you do that, you should be thinking about the accommodations that a student needs on the park and what's available to them. So there'll be some more guidance around that coming out very, very soon. But also planning for things like your test dates, your staffing plan, and much more. So this is a great time to start thinking well ahead of when these things are due to us. You can also anticipate test integrity results for 13-14 school year to be released, and test integrity work from this past year's test to be underway. And Tanya can talk a bit more about that when she gets on in a minute, but wanted to flag for you while we're going over the calendar that results of 13-14 investigations and findings will come out this fall, and then we'll have begun already, but we'll continue to ramp up our work around test integrity analysis and investigations for the 14-15 tests. So what to expect in winter, from which I've defined here as December to February for the purposes of the test year. Registration of students for spring tests, especially for any paper-based tests. So if you want to ensure that you have a printed label for your students' paper-based tests, and also to help us gauge the need for paper-based tests to be printed, it's very helpful to complete that registration in the winter. Usually we'll put out a call to LEA folks around December and base that on our data, but you will of course have an opportunity to edit, review, change, especially as students move in and out of your schools throughout the year between test registration time and testing time. That will happen in Pearson Access Next, the management platform that I mentioned earlier. You can also expect the continued release of data tools and reports around the 15-16 tests. So the scores will initially be released in the fall, but there'll be, more analysis coming, more instructional tools, PD around what to make of these scores and how to help teachers, students, parents understand the scores and what they mean. Looking forward to the next year's test. Also in the winter, we'll hold our mandatory state test administration and test integrity trainings. So those trainings are required for LEA test integrity coordinators and for school test coordinators. And those are the trainings that are going to teach you start to finish what you need to do to administer the test correctly. There will also be additional optional trainings on things like technology, accommodations and test content. So there'll be a lot of opportunities to learn more beyond today, lots and lots and lots. There'll be school and LEA test plan creation will happen at this time. So this is the time when the work really ramps up to say, okay, what's our staffing plan during testing? What are our security policies and procedures in alignment with the Test Integrity Act, which Tanya will talk about later? What's our technology plan if we're doing computer-based testing? How are we getting our computers ready? Where will we put our computers? What's our, technology plan if something goes wrong? And then doing trainings at the school level, making schedules, and finalizing your test roster. So who's in the school and how are you going to group them for the purposes of testing? Do technology preparation, final prep, and ideally conduct an infrastructure trial, which is like a dress rehearsal for a computer-based test. So that's something that allows you to sort of stress test your system and make sure all your computers and your internet and everything is working correctly so you can have a smooth day of testing. And at that time, you should also be thinking about student preparation. With tools like practice tests and tutorials. So those are highly recommended for students so that, especially students who will be using accommodations on the test so that they can be comfortable with the test, with the type of things they'll be asked to do, and with the layout of the TestNav system. So we want to make sure that students are able to show the full extent of their knowledge and that they're not thrown off by not being familiar with the program. So there are lots of tools available online that are going to help schools make sure that students go into the test ready to show what they know. Spring, March and May, you'll be wrapping up your final trainings of school staff, your final preparation, and your submission of materials to OSSI around your test security plan particularly. You'll update registration data in Pearson Access Next, and you'll place any additional orders for materials you need, like extra manuals or a paper-based test that you weren't able to order back in the winter. Testing will begin, as I mentioned, in late March, though your school or LEA might be starting a little later. During testing, what your responsibility is as an LEA person from the administrative standpoint is to be monitoring, to be recording any issues, to help your schools and teachers troubleshoot any problems that might arise, to report incidents to OSSI, and to report any irregularities. So that'll be the time when you'll be visiting your schools, listening to any issues that may have arisen, and then calling OSSI, calling Pearson, and we'll put out lots of guidance for during testing support when that rolls around. You can also expect sort of ramped up communications from us here at the assessment team with things like FAQs, any last minute reminders or guidance, and any test alerts. So if there's something weird going on, just in case, so we have a line of communication open to all the LEAs that are administering PARCC. And wrapping up the year in PARCC, what you can expect in summertime is some data cleanup, verification, and appeals. So after the test is over, we want to make sure everyone's name is spelled correctly, everyone is assigned to their correct school, the tests are going to be going to the right places. There'll be some closeout and follow-up on test security incidents or any missing materials. There'll be feedback sessions to hear how this test went and how we can improve all our processes in the future as the state agency. And then there'll be the release of the 15-16 scores. So as I mentioned, the 14-15 scores are coming out this fall, but next year there'll be a much quicker turnaround time because it'll be the second year of the test. And then next summer, preparation begins for the following year. So sort of the test cycle begins again. So I'm going to pause for a moment. Please use the chat box if you have any questions. But then I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Tanya Mead, to hear about DC test integrity. So as I mentioned, it's just an introduction, but it's very crucial for all of you to know about our test integrity law and processes.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me? Oh, no, I'm on mute. Okay, great. Oh, good afternoon, everyone. This is Tanya Mee, the State Test Integrity Coordinator for the District of Columbia. Thank you so much for your patience. We're so happy to have you today. I will just briefly go over some of the requirements for DC Test Integrity. Why do we standardize state tests? Well, state tests basically require standard uniform administration and a sterile environment so that the observation, administration, equipment, materials, and scoring will be the same for each and every student taking the test. And our goal this year, as always, is to make sure that the assessment is objective as possible and that the results generated are valid and reliable indicators of student performance. Your role, particularly as a test integrity coordinator, will be to help us eliminate bias, to prevent unfair advantage, and you do that by ensuring that there is the exact same or similar information given to each and every student under the same or similar testing conditions. Um, as I mentioned, test integrity coordinators, you guys are integral for ensuring test validity. And how do you do that? Well, first we're going to make sure that we are adequately prepared. As Bonnie mentioned, you will be the main person for developing test plans, conducting infrastructure trials and administration training, and uploading student data. If you haven't already this year, I would advise you to begin building your team, your test committee team, because you do not want to be the only person, and I'm sure you're not the only person at your LEA or the only person at the school level who has this responsibility. So if you don't mind, you should begin building your test committee, and the committee should consist of a special ed coordinator, a technology coordinator, a test monitor. Once you become adequately prepared in your developing your school plan, you will turn to the phase of test administration. And during the administration, we will hope that you ensure a neutral testing environment. You will establish computer availability and internet accessibility. You will also manage the reporting and documentation process, and you will respond to irregularities and incidents. Now, as I mentioned before, you're not doing this alone. You're actually serving as the conduit. You will be facilitating the planning process, the test administration process, and the reporting process. So in doing this, you will implement guidance received by your LEA, notifying them of any resources that are needed. And likewise, if there are any school level personnel, school test monitors that are in need of any particular resource to help them ensure the integrity of an assessment, we'll hope you will be equally responsive. In addition to this role, you will also coordinate with non-publics on the Test Integrity Act requirements. You may, if you have students that are enrolled in for non-public placement at other facilities, that could be locally in DC or Maryland or possibly nationally in Texas, Utah, Florida, we ask that you be as responsible as possible. And of course, we will help you. We also hope that you will inform your LEA and OSSE of any deviations or any unexpected occurrences that occur during the test administration process, and that you will engage parents to aid students to help the schools meet your expectations. There are some available test integrity resources, and I do not have it on this particular slide, but if you'd like to follow me to http://OSSE.org/. parcc.dc.gov. Once again, that address is http://osc.dc.gov. You will click on a program bullet, and under that program bullet, please click Test Integrity Security Investigations. Once again, if you go to the program bullet, click Test Integrity Security Investigations, and you will there you will notice we have quite a lot of resources listed that will assist you in this process. On the fourth bullet, you'll see the Test Integrity Guidelines. There's a bullet listed for test integrity training and technical assistance. The very first bullet, I believe, is test plan template and feedback. We will provide test manuals, as Bonnie suggested. We are looking now at the Test Integrity website with resources. There will also be a Test Integrity help desk. We will provide you with an LEA look forward and a PARCC administrative bulletin. Now, I know this seems like quite a lot of information on these slides, but if you have any particular or any specific questions with regards to the Test Integrity Act, I'm just one phone call away. That is 202-741-5991. Once again, 202-741-5991. If you'd like to learn more about the Test Integrity Act specifically, we will be discussing the Act and the responsibilities as well as some of the changes relating to the 2015 amendment tomorrow, I believe. That does it for me. If you have any additional questions or if you would like to raise your hand, I don't mind addressing them now. And you guys have a good day. I'm glad you're on board, and I do look forward to speaking with you and helping you in any way that I can. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Tanya. And we also have my and Tanya's contact information at the very end of this presentation. So don't worry, you'll have our emails and our phone numbers. And I'll also make sure I got a question from somebody about getting a copy of the presentation. I'll make sure to send out a copy of this PowerPoint deck to anyone who's logged on right now. We'll also be posting a recording of this presentation to our website, and I'll make sure to include the link that Tanya mentioned to our TI resources in that version of the presentation. And as she mentioned, this may seem like a lot of information at once, but we're here to guide you through it and answer any questions you might have now or later. So in addition to these TI resources, I wanted to point you all to 3 general PARCC resources that I think will be invaluable to you throughout the year. The first is OSCE's PARCC website, where we post the guidance, where we'll post this presentation and webinar. We post a lot of state-specific information, and it's a great place to bookmark on your computer. Another place you should bookmark is the PARCC portal at parcc.pearson.com, and that's where right now you can go and try out the practice tests I mentioned, try out the tutorials for different accommodations and accessibility features, look at last year's manual. That's also where this year's manual will go at parcc.pearson.com. There are also video training modules there for lots of different aspects of test administration. So how to use parcc.pearson.com, how to use Pearson Access Next. There are video training modules you can access there. And a lot of tech information for your IT person, for whoever is running the computers at your school or LEA. There is a lot of tech guidelines and tech guidance at parcc.pearson.com. And I also want to point you to PARCC's website, parcconline.org, where you can find in-depth test blueprints, performance level descriptors, and model content framework. So if you really want to dive deep into how the standards and the tests match up, how the tests are constructed, sort of how many questions there are, what standards they align to, how the grade levels differ in terms of test content, test design, you can find that information on parcconline.org. And I'm going to wrap up our presentation with some opportunities to engage. As Tanya mentioned, Tomorrow we have a meeting. We have monthly Next Generation Assessment stakeholder meetings. If you're not on the list for those meetings and you'd like to be, you can email aussieassessment@dc.gov to get on that email list. But tomorrow's meeting is going to be from 1 to 3:30, I believe, and it will cover a lot of stuff, including policy updates on PARCC, some updates on test integrity, and also updates on science and the rest of our next generation assessments. So that monthly meeting is a great place to get your questions answered and hear the latest from a policy and test administration perspective. Another way you can get engaged in PARCC, or I hope you, your teachers, staff at your schools will become engaged, is by joining the Educator Leader Cadre, which is a group of DC educators who have monthly evening meetings and really focus on instructional resources for PARCC. There are also opportunities for ELC members to attend PARCC conferences, contribute to PARCC item development and review, and really get into the details of PARCC. And if you're interested in more information about the ELC, Educator Leader Cadre, you can email Brandon Wallace, and his email's on the screen there. You can also keep an eye on the LEA Look Forward for any important announcements on PARCC or anything going on at Aussie. And if you're not on that list yet, especially if you're from a new LEA, you should email Victoria Holmes to join that list. But that's a weekly email that goes out from Aussie and has updates from across all of our divisions, so not just assessments. So this is an opportunity for Q&A. I'm just going to put up all our contact information while we do that. So I have here phone numbers and email addresses for Jessica Mellon Enos, our Director of Assessment, for myself, Bonnie O'Keefe, for Tanya Mead, who spoke earlier about test integrity, and for our other colleague, Nikki Stewart, who manages assessment development and education. So if you're interested more in the test content, test development opportunities, you can get in touch with Nikki. So I'm going to unmute everybody so that you have an opportunity to ask any questions you have, but be forewarned, if you have some background noise where you are, you may want to mute yourself if you don't intend for others to hear you. Hi, so everybody is unmuted now, and feel free to ask any questions you have. And if you have no questions, please feel free to email Tanya or myself or anyone on this list to follow up. Thank you so much for coming today, and we very much look forward to working with you in the year ahead for another successful year of PARCC. Thank you very much.
Coming up.
Thank you.